only in the area south where it buds up against another subdivision. But out of 152 acres with 315 units approved, we're talking about 7.4 acres. And I would go back to this picture, and I would bet you a steak dinner that this is relatively close to 5-10 acre range already.
But is that in that area? Is that wetlands?
There were some wetlands in there, is my recollection.
Is that the reason they're keeping it?
Probably, or just design factor.
Knowing they can't build it on it anyway.
It may be open space.
Yeah, and the other thing, there was originally some lots that were proposed, Mr. Williams, if I remember this correctly, and the commission said, we don't want you to put lots that are isolated up in there in the areas of the woods and the wetlands, so we made them pull it back. The commission did.
Okay.
Does that help
If
with
that's not a way around something. I mean,
well, certainly, if we make this an incentive to keep the trees, it's not going to stop them from going to that property line. They can still do it, knowing there's ramifications. Our thought process, gosh, I don't want to plant twice the amount of trees. I don't want to preserve 14 acres over here. I'll just stop the bulldozer 30 feet short. Well, how much land are they losing in 152 acres? They're losing 7 acres, which is going to be a perimeter buffer anyway. That 30 feet is going to stay no matter what. If you tear down the trees or not, it's going to be planted back. So just the idea is stop the destruction 30 feet before the property line.
Should clear cutting, and I'm probably answering my own question here in my mind as I'm saying this, but they clear cut that and they leave it for a year, 2 years. In the meantime, you've got rain events that are causing significant flooding on neighbors' property. That to me is wrong. But is that a result of the state requirements for grading and everything else that produces that?
So, not really. In the state, you're allowed to harvest your forest land right now without any.
Because they have to have that clear cut so they can do the grading to create the stormwater.
It's that interim period between the clear cutting and when they get
But
the
should there be
stormwater.
what's the time period? I mean, 6 months, a year, 2 years, unlimited? We'll do it when we get around to it? I mean.
Well, let me answer it this way. If this was just a landowner who wanted to harvest their woods, they're allowed to do that. And they're allowed to do it the way, presumably the way you're seeing that example happen. Mm-hmm. And that's not development and anything other than it's a form of agriculture of harvesting those woods. So, and we're diving into something that this is not the scope of this.
Another conversation, but I mean, how long should the neighbors, what's their recourse? Go to court? I mean.
I'm looking at the county attorney.
Well, I mean, yeah, and I don't know, well, I'm not going to answer that because again, timber is, a form of agriculture, which you absolutely. Should the timber farmer be required to keep a 30-foot buffer?
Ooh.
I know that's a box we may not want to open, right?
That's not the scope of this perimeter buffer.
I mean, I'm just thinking that, look, I should be able to do what I want to do with my own land. I'm fully invested in that concept. But I also understand that I can only exercise my rights to the extent that it doesn't impact you negatively. Well, chicken house odors, I don't know, maybe.
There are volumes and volumes of case law.
But yeah, I mean, where's the balance in the property rights?
Yeah.
Because both parties have property rights.
Yeah.
And if you're pouring water on my land every time we get 1.5 inches of rain, that's a problem to me.
And there are volumes and volumes of case law related just to that, water running from one property to the next. Not what we're talking about today, but it's something.
I guess we'll get to that conversation, but the weekend's rainstorm highlighted the need for that discussion.
Yeah. All right, I'm past our allocated time, so we've gotten to the meat of this, right? And this has been a wonderful conversation. So I'm going to talk more quickly than before. Section 3 is the perimeter buffer landscape plan. Very simply, this specifies what Jamie's office and the Planning and Zoning Commission will look at on the detailed plans. And that is something that's not well spelled out right now. It's everything we've talked about before, but it also includes things like a planning schedule. Okay, so if you're going to show a phasing schedule and phase 1 is located on the map, you're going to show a planning schedule of this perimeter buffer installation as well. Key point, second to last bullet, as we said before, the perimeter buffer must be planted before the first residential building permit in the respective phase. Okay, so that is something different, and it's going to be a big change if that stays in, which we hope it does. Okay, timing and bonds and guarantees. Nothing new here other than we're codifying some of the bonding practices that we have today, asking for bonding guarantees, making sure that we have enough money in place should something fail that we need to install or to replace. We're also saying that, again, that what some responsibilities of the developer is to remove the stakes and guy wires and protective fencing, and most importantly, the timing. Perimeter buffer goes in before the respective phase. Another section that's needed just to codify practice where the developer is responsible for the survival of the buffer for 2 years. We've talked about all of that timing previously, but also language that's currently in our code will keep the perpetual maintenance of the buffer will be recorded. That's all currently in our county code, so makes sense to keep it. Tree mitigation. We talked earlier about what happens if inside the buffer an accident happens, and we kind of put that in quotation marks because sometimes accidents are on purpose. But we do have tree mitigation where if the buffer or the buffer area is damaged without authorization, you must create a mitigation plan. That plan is developed by a licensed professional. We're suggesting that if you take a tree out, whether by accident or not, you put 3 trees back, because chances are the one tree is a fully developed tree, and we would want to have 3 trees replaced in return.
How does that work with previously we had, like I said, where they took away the buffer and they got to put 2 for 1?
This is after either the buffer is marked, so you mark it, non-disturbance area, it shows up on the site plan, somebody goes in and cuts the buffer down, violates a site plan or an approval, then it's 3 for 1. Or later on, Happy Harry homeowner goes in there and cuts trees down, he's got it planted 3 for 1.
Okay. How are you going to enforce that?
We're doing it actually now. We've had to do it, I haven't. Mr. Whitehouse's group has had to do that currently.
And really, it's self-reporting. My homeowner just went into the buffer and did something, which we get occasionally, and we have to go out and take a look and see how it references on the approved site plan. Most of the time, this is not developer activity. This is HOA homeowner activity, and when it's self-reported, Mr. Whitehouse is...
So the HOA reports it, and then what do you do?
So usually it's a resident in the community that reports it to us. We've had one recently where one individual went out and cut down quite a number of trees. We make contact with the homeowners association and we require them to put it right. Then afterwards they can take whatever action they deem fit against the individual property owner. Or they can just provide it and repair it at their cost. So
where do you get the authority to require HOA after the fact to plant trees?
Because they're the landowner at that point, and they would have violated the site plan that says these trees are going to be preserved and this buffer is going to be...
What if they've been there 10 years and everybody's been living happy and the guy goes and cuts down the trees? Where does the county get the authority to do that?
Well, it's still, again, and now this is assuming going forward, now we have more precise site plans, but if it shows up on the site plan that there's a buffer and it's taken down and if the HOA owns the common area, then the county's going to go to the HOA and say you need to repair this. Now, keep in mind, this is coupled with the signage that we're going to require going forward as well. So that somebody be aware that if I do this, there's consequences. I think that may be part of the issue today is there's not signage, so you don't realize the significance of the trees and the significance of keeping them versus.
What if the HOA says we're not doing it? What do you do? What's your recourse?
Well, then we have the penalties that Mr. Ross is going to talk about.
As you know, our enforcement is self-reporting, and a lot of times we go out and we try to negotiate an outcome that everyone's happy with. We're certainly not the county that throws you in handcuffs and wish you away. So most of the time we try to mitigate these circumstances. But we did install in the next, I want to point out one thing. If a tree falls down because of natural causes or an act of God, we're obviously not going to count that. But this is for negligent behavior, right? You go out, you want a barbecue patio, you knock down a few trees thinking that you own the backyard when you don't. Hopefully also with the signs in place, you realize where your property line is. We copied the fines and violations from the resource buffer. We did not put in the Hudson level of fines that have been quoted here in chambers. Well, we quoted what we have on the books today. That second bullet is from the resource buffer, a $10,000 per quarter acre pro rata of disturbance for the buffer or the buffer protection area mitigation plan. The key is the last bullet. If this is an instance where the development's not done and turned over, then we hold building permits. And no developer wants their building permits and inspections held. So if an accident happens and a bulldozer goes through the silk fence and knocks down trees and disturbs, then a mitigation plan is implemented, a fine is paid, and once we've signed off on that mitigation plan, then we'll allow permits and inspections to start back up. That last bullet is the hammer.
That is huge.
You pull permits and stop all activity in there, they will come in the next day and fix the issue.
Yep.
And most importantly, we don't want to fix the issue and issue fines. We want them to notice the silk fence and not cross it. That's what we really want.
Know exactly where the bulldozer is. And they have a GPS that tells them where they are.
They do.
There's no mistakes.
Yes.
Not to belabor this subject, but just I think Mr. Shaver point a while ago, as Mr. Robertson said, this is on a site plan. It's certified. It's whatever it is. And down the road, the HOA owns it. They maintain it. No developer, it's done. It's built out, gone. And they go in and change the buffer. Where's our enforcement power to do that? Because it was on the site plan originally, and you got to keep that forever and ever and ever? Is that?
I mean, so theoretically, how that would happen is if they want to change the buffer, which is what you're saying, they would have to come in for an amendment to the site plan. You know, but if
They chose not to do that.
they chose not to do that, then that puts
Okay.
against what we're
All right.
talking about. And as we've said, we've had to do that, unfortunately, on a limited basis, you know, already.
I would say this is a wonderful start. A lot of work done by you guys and other staff members, I'm sure. And you'll hear feedback from council. You've heard a lot today. You'll probably hear more. And then we will move this forward as it makes sense.
Yes.
We've talked earlier, we're not in a rush to do something and do it wrong and have to correct it. We want to do it right the first time. If it takes a little longer, then it takes a little longer. So, thank you for this.
Very
It's
good work.
Good information.
Certainly, if you get feedback from your constituents, more importantly, any experts, remember Mr. Wilson's definition of an expert, but if you do get any feedback from folks that make a living in forestry or engineering, it would be helpful to hear how some of these ideas would be implemented in the future.
And the final thing, just I'd like you to keep in mind, if you do hear from constituents, as Mr. Lawson talked about, we didn't try to pull a lot of this out of thin air. We looked at what we have in our code now, because it's covered in Chapter 99 and Chapter 115. Thanks. It's in 115 and 99 now. A lot of the planning requirements are in there. We reorganized some of the timing requirements, but there are timing requirements. There's bonding requirements. We made those more clear. So, you know, we didn't pull this out of thin air. Same thing with, we looked at the resource buffer. That went through a lot of vetting. And so when we weren't sure how to handle something, we said, all right, well, what do we already have in code? Let's look to that and see if it's appropriate to pull here. So I just want you all to sort of keep that in mind in terms of your thought process and comments you get from other folks as well.
Thank you guys very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you. Thank everybody. James.